Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk with Lisa and Layne. Hey Layne.
Hello.
Well, friends, we're glad you've decided to join us here today. And if you happen to be watching us on YouTube, you see that Layne and I each have our own favorite hat on, kind of tying in with today's topic. And Layne, what is our topic today?
Well, since we're at kind of the height of summer and there have been record-breaking temperatures in different locations around the world, I thought it would be a good time to talk about some of the ways you can work the most efficiently, comfortably, and safely in really hot weather when you're having to work outdoors and harvest outdoors. So we're going to be talking about our top 10 tips for working outdoors in the heat.
Oh, that's really, really good. That's a great one.
Yes.
So friends, if you're new here, we're so glad that you're here. And if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing at thegardenersworkshop.com, you can head over there. We have a fully stocked online garden shop. We have all of our online courses, and it's like home base for everything that we do. So Layne is the seed manager there, and I'm not sure what I am. I'm the head bottle washer, I guess you would say. And we would love for you to join us over there. And this podcast is part of all of that, and it came to life to answer your questions. So
Yes.
Layne, take it away.
Okay, so our very first tip is have everything ready to go in advance.
Sure. So when you're a commercial flower farmer, which means you're most often paying help, right? You have employees. You always want to be efficient. And for me, being efficient was really having what we needed ready to roll. And what does that mean? That people don't have to walk around to look for a hat or to go hunt up a pair of shears or a pair of gloves or, oh my goodness, we're out of flower conditioning, the CVBN tablets that we put into all of our buckets. I mean, it may sound like nanoseconds to you, but it is not when you're holding up the whole freight train from getting started, right? So I was always kind of focused on people putting stuff away where it should be, so it's there, right, when you need it next time. But that was one of the jobs I did in the heat of the summer. I just remember the summer that it was 105 in June for several days. I mean, that is like killer that early in the year. And that's when I really learned about being efficient.
Yeah. And I think something else that could tie into this having everything ready to go is even having a plan for the day, knowing what you need to get done and who is going to do it.
Yeah. And, I think that most often, I guess I say that most often, for me, I always have a plan. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In my mind, it's sometimes, we knew who was going to cut what and who's responsible for what. And so that is so helpful because standing around hemming and hawing wastes cool time, right?
Yes. Okay. So have everything ready to go and have a plan of what needs to be done. So then our next point is going to be start early.
When people hear how early we used to start when we were in high production, which meant we were harvesting 10 to 15,000 stems of flowers a week. And the image that you're showing is during one of those high production years. There was so many flowers to cut. And because we always tended to sell everything, you were really stimulated to get them all cut, right? So what we kind of figured out was when it's really getting hot, when it's going over 92 or 93 degrees after lunchtime, it is really impossible to go out there and work after lunch. It's one thing if you have like a half of one row left of 100-foot bed and there's 4 of y'all that can go jump out there and do it really quickly, you can manage to do that. But we began during that year I previously mentioned. That year was 105 for several days in June. We really learned. We were starting work at 5:30 in the morning back then. And when they would come to work, it's still dark. but yet we were actually filling buckets. You know, the carport, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that's the end of our work building. And that carport is kind of like our outdoor workstation. And that's where all the buckets would be filled. Well, there's lights there. So we found that by getting to work even like 30 minutes before sunrise, that allowed us to do all the prepping that we don't, well, you know, why don't we want to fill buckets the night before? There's two reasons in my book, and I'm sure people have others. One is if you filled those buckets with water overnight, they really get a lot of insects are drawn to it. But worse than that is you don't want a bird or somebody to get in it and they drown. They can't get out of a bucket, you know, because it would have a gallon of water in it. So we didn't, the water would be dirty. You'd have to dump it from the insects and do it again. So we just never did it. We started at 5:30. We were filling buckets, putting the flower conditioning CVBN tablet in. And we got more harvesting done by from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. It's like air conditioning outdoors when your days are 100 degrees after lunch. I mean, you get more work done in that window than you will for the rest of the day. And so we really focused and got early. But the other part of starting early is you have to knock off early. You know, as an employer, if I'd have asked you to come to work at 5:30 and still expected you to work until whatever your end of the day was, that's not very much stimulation for getting you out of bed at 4:30 in the morning to get here on time, right? So we always tried to knock off early, and that was a real inspiration for our employees.
So if you started at 5:30 or the employees arrived at 5:30, what time were they leaving?
So it would depend on who they were and what their jobs were, but our goal was to have little, if no, outdoor harvesting work to do after lunch. So we would harvest until 10, at about 9:30 or 10, we'd have a 10-minute shade, food, fluid drink break. And then we would have lunch at noon. The goal was after our 30-minute lunch break to do things like wash buckets, seed start, to do those things that can be done under cover. Or, I mean, it's just too hot for flowers to be cut in the afternoon. I mean, when you cut a zinnia, you know, and it wilts before you can get it to the bucket, that's a sign that you should not be outside in the heat, right? I mean, that's heat warning kind of stuff. So anywhere from 1 to 3, it just really depends on what their job description actually was.
Yeah, and I think that helps it to just be a more enjoyable experience, whether you're just working in your own garden or on a farm, and it helps people not dread going out there and working. And it probably helps for you, Lisa, as a business owner with employee retention.
Yeah, I mean, and it just makes people realize that you really care about them.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? It's like we're all in this together. I totally don't want to be out there cutting flowers in those kind of conditions. And not to mention, as I said, you really can't cut flowers in that kind of heat. And expect them to perform well. So we just found it was very surprising to all of us how much cooler it is at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
It's hard to get out of bed. You know, it's hard to get started, but knowing that you are going to be taking a siesta at 2:30 in the afternoon and thinking about all the work you got done and you're home now really helps to get you stimulated to do that.
And something else we do here in our garden, if we have a particularly strenuous task we know we're going to have to do that day, we try to do the hardest task, the hardest job in the coolest part of the day. Do you do that on the farm?
Yep. We call that eat the ugly frog first. That is like do the job that is the hardest, most strenuous, most distressful first thing in the morning. Like for instance, today, Andrew decided he mows the pathways in the garden, and that's not a super strenuous job, but it is. And there's a lot of pathways. So he mowed first thing this morning, you know, get it out of the way. And then the rest of the jobs were like gravy after you got the hard thing done. It really is. That's a great analogy. And we, yes, do that frequently in business and out on the farm.
Yes. Yeah. Just even with work.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to what you're actually wearing. And our third tip is going to be wear appropriate clothing. What does that mean to you, Lisa? It might mean something a little bit different to each person, but how about for you?
Right. What a great image. What a great image. So yeah, it really, and when I started farming, this is our 25th year, 25 years ago, there wasn't so much specialty clothing available as there is now, wicking clothes, breathable clothes. I have typically worn cotton, like a men's cotton shirt, the cotton button downs, that type of fabric. And I've always been very drawn to wear light colors.
Yes.
White is less attractive to insects. And I've worn pants when I first started farming, believe it or not, years ago. I used to wear steel-toed boots. They were like little black hiking boots is what they look like. And they were steel-toed because my husband owned a plumbing company, is very in tune to safety and using equipment because I was tilling and doing all these things. But as the years evolved and I did less mechanical work as he did that mainly, I switched over to, garden clogs and that kind of stuff. So light colors, lightweight, loose fitting, and of course the pith helmet.
Yeah.
Which, I'll put mine back on because I feel a little heat inside in here. This pith helmet, can I tell the story of the pith helmet?
Of course.
All right. So I didn't used to ever wear a hat. I never used to wear gloves. I never used to wear a hat. I was like, oh, gloves. I want to feel the soil on my hands. That's the story that everybody tells. I want to feel it. Well, then Kelly, who, y'all may have heard about her. She works with us and is our IT person. Her mom, who is my sister-in-law, bought me the first pair of Atlas gloves. They weren't called Atlas gloves back then. She bought them at a flower and garden show. They were white of all colors. It was a test. She bought me 2 pair and brought them, fell in love, didn't know that you could wear gloves and feel everything. We have sold tens of thousands of those gloves as soon as we went into business in 2005 selling stuff. So I started wearing gloves. Well, not long after that, I was out in the garden, I was working alone, cooking, because when you're alone, another thing I wanted to say about starting early, a lot of times if you don't have enough help, if you can't get the harvesting done at the appropriate time, you have either planted too much or you don't have enough help, meaning there's not enough people harvesting to get the job done in a timely fashion. Well, back when I was a one-girl show, I, of course, was still cutting flowers at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Killing myself, right? Well, my neighbor, Oliver, who was the farmer next door that had a 40-acre horse boarding farm, who was a lifelong dairy farmer, pulled his tractor up alongside my fence, the fence that we shared. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time I hear his tractor coming, I'm thinking, I do not have time to talk to this old man. I do not have time to stop. I've got to get these flowers done. They're sold. I had orders the next day, pressure. He pulls up alongside the fence. And I walk over because I had to, he's right there. He could see me.
Yeah.
He said, Lisa, what is wrong with you? You look like you're about to die. And I said, Oliver, I'm so hot. I'm about to die. And he lifted his white pith helmet off of his head and said, there's a reason that mailmen wear the pith helmet and people on safaris wear pith helmets, because they keep you cooler and they're just the best hat to wear. And I bought myself a pith helmet the next day. And
wow.
I've loved it ever since. I mean, you can wear it in the rain. It doesn't get warped. It doesn't, get wavy and get down in your eyes. And anyway, so totally, completely love my pith helmet.
Yeah. So some sort of hat is really important with a wide brim, help protect the tops of your ears so they don't get burnt. But also a hat that lets some heat escape so that it doesn't build up.
Yep.
Yeah. And then loose, lightweight clothing. And then I always, even though it's counterintuitive, my husband and I always like to wear long sleeves and pants. And we tuck our pants into our socks just to help with things like ticks.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing. Do you do that too?
Yes. And, Bobo wears long sleeves that works here because she doesn't want the sun damage on her arms. And I mean, if you really stop and watch some of the landscapers that work outside all the time and watch them, you'll see they have long pants and long sleeves on.
Always. They always do. Yep. And any parts of your skin that are going to be exposed, make sure you have sunscreen on. You can wear sunglasses. I mean, there are even things like little personal fans you could have on your neck if you wanted, or those cooling towels that you can put around your neck, just whatever you need to keep cool. Even if I have to be outside and it's sunny and it's a one-handed job, sometimes I'll even take an umbrella out there just to keep the sun off me, but whatever you need to do.
It's true. There are a lot of things that you can do. In our experience, the starting early, eating and drinking often really gets you through, and wearing a hat. So so true.
Okay, we're on to our fourth point here, and this one makes me laugh, even though I do understand it, but this one is no talking. Explain, Lisa.
So Bobo and I had to talk about this morning. I said, Bobo, do you remember when because it was hot, she and I were harvesting flowers this morning, and I still had all the celosia to still harvest, and she was harvesting some rooster peppers. I said, Bobo, do you remember back when we were in high production, how we weren't supposed to talk? And she said, yep, nothing was important enough to talk about when you had a job to do. So here's the bottom line. First off, what you have to understand, when you have, back in our high production, we had 5 or 6 people out in the garden cutting. All it takes is one chatty Cathy to get a conversation going. And I purposely, and this wasn't just when I was farming, when I worked at the veterinary hospital, I was the same way. You don't stop working when you start talking. Most people do. Most people instantly stop whatever they're doing with their hands to focus on the person and talk. And when it's going to be 105 degrees at 1 o'clock and you have, 40 buckets of flowers that need to be cut. So the way that I did that is I always went and worked alone, the farthest I could be from everybody else. But I would actually spread them out in the field. So it wasn't quite so easy to just carry on a conversation. Not only does it exert energy, it wastes, because people stop. I mean, it just brings back so many memories. I would hear a conversation, I turn around and look, and I'm seeing 2 people standing up, not cutting flowers.
Yeah.
And it really was not about, you are supposed to be working, not talking about what you had for dinner last night. I don't mind if you talk and cut at the same time, but it still slows you down. So it wasn't a policy. I would just talk about it. It's like, how much better is it to be by 12 o'clock when we eat lunch? None of us have to go back out in the field. It's like, because we got it all done. So it was really about, we were always racing the heat. Always. Yes. There's nothing you can do to fix that.
Yeah.
So no talking allowed.
Is the talking allowed once you move to carport type tasks?
Yes. And yes. And so Bobo and I, when we talked this morning, I said, so Bobo, now that I only have 10 more feet of this coxcomb to cut, and it's just one side and you're almost done, I have something to tell you. So we had a chat. We just had a little chit chat, and so it's all about, it's just really hard to have a conversation and keep on working.
Okay. Our next point, number 5, is have a runner if that is possible, if you're working with a team.
Yeah, I did not have a runner. We didn't have runners for quite some time. And then we don't always have runners, but it just so happens that I had an employee who had a college age son that really needed a job. And so I said, okay, we'll let him be a runner. So what a runner is that the harvesting person, because our beds were 120 feet long and there was 50 of them or so, a bunch of them. And so to walk down that aisle every time your hand got full out to the harvest trailer, because we never carried buckets into the garden. I mean, that's even worse, having to carry a full bucket out. So we would have a runner occasionally, and that's what he did. So that means that I would be down one aisle cutting coxcomb, and somebody would be over there cutting XYZ, and he literally would run. I mean, and he finally, is so funny, knowing that we were going to talk about this, I was thinking about it, Layne. I can remember her coming to me and saying, he said, I hate running for you. I said, well, that's a very nice thing to say to your boss, He said, you cut like 2 to 3 times faster than everybody else. I need to come back to you 2 to 3 more times than anybody else on this cutting team. So he had to hustle, is what it basically boiled down to. But so there's just efficiency. It may not always work that way for some people, but for us, it was helpful. For instance, one of our top cash crops for years was always coxcomb. We were known for it. And while we didn't grow the giant coxcomb, we grew, the 3-inch heads that are just the perfect size. Well, those stems are heavy. And so I didn't want to hold more than, maybe 8 to 10 in my hand at any given time. And so a runner just really makes the system more efficient. And he didn't know a thing about cut flowers or cutting flowers, but he could do that job.
Yeah, that is a really good job for someone that isn't as experienced in terms of doing the actual harvest. It's still a way for them to help out.
Yeah.
And if they complain too much, you can just remind them of rule number 4, which is no talking.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Okay, now we're going to move on to tip number 6, which is harvest sensitive crops first. So I have a picture of some basil up. Certain things are just prone to wilting. And if you're going to be harvesting a bunch of stuff, prioritize those things that might be a little more sensitive.
So true. And, funny enough, last night, I actually made a little list of those 3 crops that I was going to be harvesting today that I wanted to remember to go straight out, get them done, and get them back in. Basil was one, hydrangea was one, and triloba, rudbeckia was another one, because they can be wilty. And I'm happy to report that none of them wilted. And it's all about timing. Yeah. So those sensitive crops, you put them first, they aren't a problem.
Yeah. Okay. And then this is another one I wanted to throw in, which is track the sun to take advantage of shade. Now, this might not always be possible depending on exactly what you're doing and where it's located. But if you're doing some generic tasks, try to stay in the shade for as long as possible and follow the sun. So if you know that there's an area that's going to get lit up first, maybe do the work in that area first and then continue to follow that shade as the sun comes in over you, just to take advantage of it and stay in the shade as long as possible.
Sure. So we have a couple of spots here on the farm that get lit later. And oftentimes we would go and harvest at those areas first, just to keep and to enjoy the shade. And then we have a whole garden that gets shaded in the afternoon, evening. There were times when I'd say, y'all leave that field. I'll do that this evening, when we're just overwhelmed. Right. And so, yeah, that works really well too.
Yeah. And then tip number 8 is get your flowers out of the sun. So how quickly do you like to get your flowers out of the sun, Lisa?
So, well, immediately would be your choice, but you can do that a couple of different ways. So if you have a runner person or somebody that's working with you, that when buckets get full, if it's needed, they can just walk them into your building or wherever your flowers ultimately end up. For years, we had a little Ranger Ford truck, an older one that had a cap on the back of it, that we would actually put it was a farm truck, basically. We would put the flowers in the back of that so they'd be shaded at least, right? So that really helped. We also had a big trailer that we pulled around that we looked like the Beverly Hillbillies. We used some extra hoe handles that had been damaged that we couldn't sell. And we stuck them in, and then we had sheets we made like a sail across the top to create shade. And on the golf cart that I use now, I can make it so that 6 buckets are in total shade just by the virtue of the way you park it. But how many times have you seen flowers just sitting out in the buckets? I mean, people just don't think about it. When they're new, let's just say I'm not here or I'm in another part of the field and I come back, it's like, oh my gosh, get that basil buckets, get them in the building. They've been done with them for an hour, So yes, be very sensitive. The sun can cause a lot of issues in the bucket after it's actually cut. So we like to get them in as soon as possible.
And how long are they okay to sit in a shaded area versus going into the air-conditioned building?
I mean, it really depends on what crop you're talking about. Cooling the flowers down as quickly as possible definitely helps vase life. And sitting in the shade is okay, but you also have to weigh the wind. Even though you might not think it's windy, a gentle breeze dehydrates the flowers, the foliage, and everything in it. So we are all about, for years, for the first 4 years, I did it all on a carport. They were never indoors.
Yeah.
But we moved our flowers really quickly, and you just figure it out.
Okay, so our tip number 9 is going to be stay hydrated and take frequent breaks in a shady or air-conditioned location. So let's talk about the stay hydrated first, Lisa. How important is it to stay hydrated?
It makes all the difference in the world. And I did not used to be a believer or a, person that did this. When other people started working with me is when I really realized, oh my gosh, I didn't eat lunch. I don't eat lunch. I worked until I dropped, basically. And I might drink some water, but not like we do now. And we never drank, drinks that had electrolytes and that kind of stuff in it, right? So what I have learned now that I'm old, 62, we eat breakfast. Steve and I eat breakfast at 5 a.m. in the morning. I mean, we eat oatmeal with an egg on top of it, and to get some calories and some protein. And then to try to, I'm guilty of not carrying water with me out on the farm. But I have cups here in the work building. I mean, I just come in and chug an 8-ounce glass of water every time I come in, just get it down and refresh your body. And then about 10 o'clock, we would take a break. And people don't want to, but it's just so important to eat a snack, whether that is watermelon, which is so refreshing, or any fruit, or nabs. Nabs are crackers with peanut butter or cheese, which is just some protein. It's not because you're hungry, but your body needs fuel. It is hot. It is really needs that little bit of push, and drinking lots of fluids it really changed. I used to get headaches often in the afternoon. I thought, oh, it's the heat. Well, it's like, guess what? When you hydrate and eat throughout the day, whether you want to or not, it has nothing to do that I'm hungry or I'm thirsty. Your body needs it. You have to be the lifeguard of your body. And it's changed everything. I get so much more work done, and I feel so much better when the work is done than I used to.
And by the time you're actually thirsty, oftentimes you're already getting dehydrated.
Yep.
So you need to be hydrated before you even go out, and then continue to hydrate during and after. Because remember, you're sweating also, you're losing a lot of water that way. How often would you take breaks, Lisa, and how long do you recommend people take a break?
It totally depends on how hot it is. When it is really humid already at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're already out there saying, oh my gosh, we're croaking already. You're already lamenting about how miserable you are. Then we would take breaks, at 9 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, and take a short 10-minute break, usually for bathroom breaks, drinks. Some people like to come into the air conditioning building. Some people don't. I am definitely a person that coming in to the air conditioning for 10 minutes and drinking and eating some nabs or something just refreshes me. Other people are like, but walking in and out of those two different climates doesn't make them feel better. It definitely refreshes me. So that's a personal choice, but I don't think any break over 10 or 12 minutes during the workday is really necessary. I think longer than that, your body slides out of the work mode.
And if you don't have an air-conditioned space somewhere shady, I'm showing Lisa's hellebore bed, which is a really shady location. So just try to get out of the sun.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, and now we're going to be on to number 10, which is be on the lookout for signs of heat-related illnesses. So things like heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Know the symptoms of those and just be aware of what they are. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a CDC document that describes some of the symptoms of those. But just know what to look for, because they are really serious and can be deadly.
They can, and Steve Ziegler rode in an ambulance once for heat stroke.
Oh.
And it was so frightening for me hearing that and having to rush to the hospital. But it's like those, and we're so speaking to gardeners and flower farmers. We are a driven group of people. And if there is a job that needs to be done, we typically push ourselves to get it done. And that's what Steve did. And of course, he had a whole cooler of water on his truck, but guess what? He fed that water to all of his men and didn't really drink. And he was driving down the road with another guy in his truck, and he just started kind of talking crazy. And the guy said, I think maybe we better pull over. And they pulled over and they decided that, yes, in fact, he was having a heat stroke. I mean, it was really, really scary. I mean, to think that my strapping Steve totally just kind of, you know what I mean? He started talking crazy. I mean, how
Yeah.
does that happen? Heat is a powerful thing that you have to respect heat and take care of your body. So you're so right.
Yes. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, those were our 10 official tips. But one thing I wanted to mention is if you don't like working in the heat, try to structure your farm or garden so that you don't have to work in the heat. I was just interviewing Jonathan Leese for some episodes that'll be coming out later this season. And he was telling me their farm model is they sell through basically the end of May. And then they don't sell flowers the rest of the year. Of course, they have to plant things out in the fall that they're going to be harvesting again in the spring, but they've specifically structured their whole farm model around having summers off.
It is so true. You know, Layne, things are just, I'm just so happy how the world is developing about as far as career choices. And when you become, most of us become entrepreneurs and business owners because we were working somewhere and thought it's not, I would do it different than that, or I want to pursue my idea or whatever. You want to be in charge, right? But then you step into that arena and all of a sudden, all the weight of the responsibility is on your shoulders. And all of a sudden you go to work to do whatever you have to do to create the business, cash flow, basic bottom line, and you'll do whatever. Dave Downey and I were just talking about that we grew as much as we could for as long as we could in our effort to pedal and keep the monster fed, you know? And I have so much respect for Jonathan and Megan. And that would be me today. If I was starting my farm today, and I mean, Jonathan has an off-farm job, and which is the normal model for most flower farmers. Most flower farmers, we have some great friends that is their family's business, but most people, that's not the case. It's a second income, and that allows you to really create whatever business model you want. I would be a fall planting, cool flower slinging, spring selling until the end of May, probably. I wouldn't be planting sunflowers every week. You know, I mean, I would make the models. So, I mean, we never took a summer vacation, you know?
Yeah.
So that's great. And then the heat, that's the part of it, you know?
Yeah. And we do that too, kind of in our garden. My husband and I do not like hot weather. So we purposely have structured it so that everything out there is really low maintenance for the summer. And if we're going to be adding a lot of plants like perennials or shrubs, we try to get those in the fall so that we're not having to be out there the next year watering whenever it's warm. They kind of get established and can take care of themselves. And if there's any bare ground that's not covered by plants, we make sure to mulch that so it helps reduce the weeding pressure and again, helps reduce the watering. There's just things you can do to structure your setup to help you avoid having to be out there during those hottest months of the year.
Because isn't the bottom line to what you're speaking of and to business, it's all about choices and making educated choices. And yes, so those are great tips.
Yes. And then I have one fun question that is popsicle related. Do you eat Otter Pops, Lisa?
Otter
Pop? Have you ever eaten an Otter Pop?
I've never heard of an Otter Pop.
Those little popsicles? Those little tiny? No?
No.
Oh. Okay. You know what? I bet they call them something different here. I grew up with Otter Pops in California.
You mean the little push-up things?
Yes, the push-up
so we call those ices. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they have different names depending on which brand you're eating and where you live. So everyone out there, tell us what you call those little freezer pops that I call Otter Pops and Lisa calls ices.
Yes.
And for my popsicle question, we're going to pretend that you were eating Otter Pops, Lisa, because I'm sure whatever you were eating was something similar in terms of the colors and flavors. And Otter Pops have otter characters associated with each flavor.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to ask you which flavor of Otter Pop was your favorite. All right. And they have fun names. So if you're confused by anything, just let me know. The options are, I'm going with the classic flavors here. Alexander the Grape, which was purple, Little Orphan Orange, Louis Blue Raspberry, Poncho Punch, which was pink, Sir Isaac Lime, which is the green one, and Strawberry Shortcake, which is the red.
Well, I'm a grape lover.
Oh,
I'm Alexander.
interesting. So you're Alexander the grape. See, I'm Sir Isaac Lime. But what's funny is the one flavor I didn't care for was the grape, but my sister was an Alexander the grape.
Yeah.
So things worked out very well. Okay, well, that's good to know. So we could easily share a box of Otter Pops then.
Yes, we could. We wouldn't be duking it out over the same flavor.
Yes. All right. Well, that was it for this episode, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that and enjoyed hearing some of these tips about how to be the most efficient and be comfortable, and above all, be safe when you're working in the heat. So thank you so much for joining us. And remember to leave us a review or rating in a podcast app, and a like and comment over on YouTube. And feel free to share your favorite popsicle flavor as well.
And thank you, Layne. And remember, friends, if you want to keep up with what's happening at the Gardener's Workshop, sign up for our newsletter over at thegardenersworkshop.com. So thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Layne.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.